Hey guys, I've seen a lot of people ask the question of how do we put Jellyfin behind a proxy authentication layer, whether that's Cloudflare, Zero Trust, or Pangolin SSO. So in this video, I want to show you just how to do that. Now I'm going to be using Pangolin as my proxy layer. It's generally what I recommend for streaming content. Now it's been debated for a while now whether or not it's actually against Cloudflare's terms of service to stream media. The previous understanding was that you're only really allowed to stream media through Cloudflare if you're using their storage services in the cloud. But there's a lot of debate about that. It's not particularly clear. In any case, I love using Pangolin as an alternative to Cloudflare anyways, because I have full control over it. And especially there's no upload file size limits for image, which is a really important application for me. That just ensures everything really works well with the mobile application. But because we have full control over Pangolin, there's so much that we can do when it comes to more dynamic control. So I have seen people point out that you can whitelist an IP address as a bypass rule in the Pangolin SSO layer, which is absolutely true. And that's actually what we're going to be leveraging in this video. So I'm going to show you in this video how we can use Authentik as our proxy authentication layer for Pangolin. It's our identity provider for the Jellyfin resource. And what we're going to do is have a webhook. We're going to be leveraging the Pangolin API so that when someone logs into Pangolin through Authentik on their home network, we're going to have a webhook that writes a rule to Pangolin to whitelist their IP address. So of course we can customize this so that only a certain authenticated role in Pangolin has this capability. But then that way, you know, like say for example, my dad wants to be able to use my Jellyfin server. I don't have my Jellyfin server publicly accessible, right? You have to go through Pangolin. You have to authenticate there. And Jellyfin Client apps, they cannot do that redirect. The only way we can get the client apps on TVs to work is if that IP address is whitelisted. So all that my dad has to do is just go to the Authentik sign-in page on his phone, on his Wi-Fi, and then he signs in, and then now he's able to use his Jellyfin Client apps on any of his TVs because the IP address for his network has been whitelisted. So it's just a great way to ensure you're getting only authenticated traffic to, you know, your self-hosted services. I personally only really want 100% authenticated traffic hitting my internal network here. So this is how I can accomplish it with Jellyfin. So let's get started. Okay, so I have my Jellyfin instance running here on a virtual machine. And I do have Pangolin in the Newt tunnel. And I do have the Newt tunnel set up on the server here. So you can see I have my Newt tunnel in the Pangolin folder, and then my Jellyfin application with the Docker Compose file here. So if you don't already have Authentik set up, make sure you watch my video on how to do that, because that's going to be a major part of this video here. Let me just make sure that I have a public Pangolin resource for this. Let me log out here, and I'm going to sign into Pangolin as the owner. And let's go to resources. And I need to actually go ahead and create a DNS entry and a resource for Jellyfin. So let me just go ahead and show you how to do that. Make sure we know how to do that. Let's go to your DNS provider. I'm using Cloudflare, and we're going to go to your site and then the DNS records and create a record. It's going to be a record, and you can call this whatever domain you want to give it. So I'll give it media. So it's going to be media.thomaswaldtech.com. And that points to my Oracle VPS, which is running Pangolin. No Cloudflare proxy. Don't want to be limited by Cloudflare proxy at all. Okay, we have the DNS record pointing to the server. Let's hop back over to our Pangolin resources. Make sure we add a resource for that domain. Go ahead and call this Jellyfin HTTPS. I'm going to give it the same subdomain of media. And then I'm going to route this directly to Jellyfin. So I already have my Ubuntu VM site. That is my minute tunnel site. And then we're going to go straight to the IP address and port. I have this running on port 8700. So IP address, that's the local IP address of the server, and port is 8700. Yours might be the default port for Jellyfin. And then create that resource. Now, this is not using a wildcard cert. Let me just see if it has drawn an SSL cert yet. And we get the privacy error here. So meaning that we're using the default traffic self-sign cert at the moment, but we can just kind of check to see, okay, yeah, that is working. And the cert is now working too. So it looks like it kind of already fixed itself. Didn't say that it's not trusted. Okay, so it's behind SSO, and that's great for web clients. However, it's not good for native clients running on your TV. We can prove that by trying to connect with the app. First thing I'm going to do is just go to Proton VPN, and I'm going to connect to a Tennessee server here. So just that I'm using a Proton IP address, and we can work with that. Next thing I want to do is actually hit up the media domain I just set up, media.thomaswildtech.com, which I had just went to. And this takes me to my Pangolin SSO sign-in, which is exactly what I want. Now, for simplicity, I'm going to use a Authentik user that I set up, and let's just make sure authentication, we've got that set to whatever role we want. So let's give this to family and media, and we're going to save users and roles. Okay, so what I'm going to do is log in with Authentik. This is going to redirect to Authentik. I could sign in with Gmail if I wanted to, with Google. I'm just going to sign in with my Jim user, and password is Jim. At least I thought it was. Users. Oh, Tim. Tim, not Jim. Okay, not you. Timmy. Tim. Okay, Tim is getting in, and Tim can now access the Jellyfin website on the phone. Just make sure I can get in with my user, Thomas Wild Tech. And that looks great. I'm into Jellyfin. Of course, I can actually save this as a progressive web app on my phone's desktop and use Jellyfin pretty dang good like that. You lose some features like the picture-in-picture and background playing, I think. However, that's besides the point. Let me just demonstrate that if I have the Jellyfin app, we're not going to be able to connect to our server. Let's just verify that. And if we try to connect, it's just not going to be able to get through that SSO layer. Now let's just do a proof of concept here by going to the rules, and let's just go ahead and do a always allow. I'm going to enable the rules. Always allow is different than pass to auth. Always allow means that we effectively bypass auth. So let me actually see what my IP address is on my phone. Let's create a new tab. Okay, and then you can see my IP address right there, the 146.70. So this is in Memphis, Tennessee. So just proof of concept here. We're going to do an always allow and set this to 146.70.8.25. Add that rule and save all settings. Okay, so let's hop back to the Jellyfin app and let's try to connect again. This time we got right into the server and I can log in. I'm just going to uncheck remember me for now, and we're signed in. Okay, so the bypass rule works. Now we need to actually create our little webhook so that we can dynamically modify an existing rule on the fly whenever I sign in through Pangolin, through Authentik. Okay, before we can really get into the meat of setting up the Authentik webhook, we do need to enable the Pangolin API. So let's do a search for Pangolin docs, go to the Pangolin docs, and it's called the integration API. And there is a warning here that the REST API, this is all in heavy development. So there could be changes. So the first thing that we have to do is actually enable the integration API. And that's going to require another domain. And then after that, we're going to check out certain API keys with certain permissions. So I'll show you what that entails. And then we'll also look at the documentation so that I can show you what API endpoints we're actually going to be hitting from our Authentik webhook. So let's go to the documentation for enabling the API, and let's do each of these things. Okay, so I've SSH'd into my VPS here, where I have Docker installed with a Docker folder, Pangolin folder, and Authentik. And then we're going to follow the instructions to enable the integration API. So first thing we do is go to the config file. So that's going to be the config.yaml. And then we need to add the enable integration API like that. If you want to specify a different port, you can do that. Otherwise, we can just go with the default 3003. I'll put that in here and just comment that and just say default 3003. Okay, and then let's save the config file, and then let's go to dynamic config. So traffic, dynamic config. Okay, and in the routers section, we're going to see our Pangolin domain right here a couple times. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab these two routers from the docs for our API, our integration API, and we need a domain for that. So I'm just going to go with Pangolin -API. So let's go to Pangolin -API, Pangolin -API, and then change the example to your domain, Thomas Weld Tech. So we've got those two routers there. One is just for, HTTP with a redirect. And then I don't have a Badger, so just comment this out. We don't need that. And then we have the actual HTTPS router right here. This is just the redirect. Now I'll scroll down to the services, and then right above the API service, we can do the integration API service. So not to be confused with just the normal web apps API. This is the integration API, and this is running on port 3003. So that's that default port. You would need to change it here if you changed it in the config. Okay, so the only thing we need to do is actually create a DNS record for our new domain. Let's copy this guy and go back to my cloud provider, my Cloudflare provider. Go to your domain dashboard and then go to DNS records. Okay, and we're going to add a record. This is going to be the Pangolin API record. You can see I already have my auth record down here that I created in the last tutorial. That goes to Authentik. I'm just going to copy that IP address and paste it here and save that. Okay, and then let's just hop back over here and let's just go and take the whole thing down and bring it back up. So let me cd back to my Pangolin folder, and we're going to do a sudo docker compose down, and then do a sudo docker compose up d. Now we should be good with the integration API, and we can generate some API keys. Okay, so I'm going to create two API keys, one that only Authentik is going to have, and then one that we're going to use on our own computer to test that has more permissions. So I'm only going to give Authentik the only scoped permissions that it needs. So I'll just say local computer and then Authentik. So we're going to go to our organization and then go down to API keys. And then we're going to do generate API key. And for this one, I'm going to do computer. Now, unless there's a whole bunch of other things that you want to do, you could allow all permissions. But what we mainly need for the computer is we want to see all of our resources. Might as well go ahead and have the ability to look at a particular resource. We don't need to update any resource, but we do need to look at resource rules. So let's go ahead and have a create, delete, list, and update for our local computer. And just in case, I'm going to go and do list site resources and update site resource. just in case. Oh, list site resources and get site resource. I don't remember off the top of my head what the difference is unless one is specifying a particular site that's being used. So let's generate this and we have our API key. Let's copy and paste that guy. Okay, I'm going to use a application called Postman to demonstrate the API calls. I could do this with curl request too, and we can do that, make sure it's documented in my website. But it's kind of nice to just have the visualization here as well. So let's go ahead and open up that API documentation. And let's go down to the resources. And let's create a endpoint for the org, or sorry, for the resource and resources like this. List resources for an organization. That's what we're going to do. So let's open this up. So we're going to do https://penguinapi.thomaswilde.tech.com/v1/org/org-id. Now that is going to be this. This should be separated by dashes. So this should be Thomas Wilde Tech. That's my organization ID. And then /resources. Now we do need to provide an authorization header. That can be done in the headers area or the authorization area. We'll just do it in the headers. Go to authorization. You're going to type in bearer and then paste the token just like that and send that request. So here we go. We got the responses here. Image.thomaswilde.tech, cloud, Authentik, Jellyfin. Now the important thing about this is the resource ID. We're going to need to know this. Let's rename this to get resources. Okay, let's look back at our settings for Jellyfin. Go to resources and go to Jellyfin. So what we did to allow my phone to work is we created a resource rule. Now the way that we're going to do this is we're going to have we're a little bit limited in our approach based on the way that the integration API works and what Authentik can do. Now, if we look at the rules, so before we look at the actual API rules, the webhooks in Authentik, you are limited to doing a post request. You cannot do any other type of request for a webhook in Authentik except for a post. Now, what does that mean? If we go to resource rules, you can see that a post request updates an existing resource rule. Whereas for creating a rule, it is a put request. So what does that mean? It means that we need to have pre-existing rules for each of our Jellyfin users that we want to be able to update their whitelisted IP address. That means that these rules need to be created ahead of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and create a couple rules here. So let's create a rule that we're going to call this add resource rule. Okay, we're going to get that same URL here. And then I'm going to do resource and then the resource ID. So that's that primary key value. Go back down here. My resource ID for Jellyfin is 9. So that is the resource ID is 9. And then go to the rules endpoint. We need to have that same authorization header with our bearer token, and then go to the body of the request. I'm going to choose raw JSON, and then just copy this body right here. You have to have each of these values. I'm going to start with enabled is false, priority. I kind of like to do hundreds, so I'm going to set this one to 200. Match is going to be IP, and then we're going to set the action to accept. So let's go ahead and run that. Oh, and then I need to change that to a put request, of course, put, and let's send that again, not a get request. Oh, and then the value, invalid IP provided. So let's change that to nothing. Let's see if it takes an empty string, maybe not. Okay, so we do need to provide just a default IP. So I will just do 0.0.0.0 like that. And then we've created the resource rule. So hop back over here and refresh the page. And you can see we have created that resource rule. Now you cannot have two rules with the same priority. So if you're going to do it again, need to change that to, and I'll just demonstrate that. Go ahead and try it. Never mind. I think that must be a change because it used to be that these could not have the same. Oh, okay. In the UI, they cannot have the same priority. If you use the API, apparently you can set the same priority. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, I'm going to change this one to 100. So now we have 3 rules here for my 3 Jellyfin users, family members, friends, whoever. What I'm going to do here is just create like a spreadsheet that is just going to keep track of every little data point I'm going to need for my webhook. So I'll show you why I'm doing this here. So the name of the person, so keep track what their Jellyfin rule priority is. We need that because when I do a post request to update, it must match that priority value. Got the rule ID. Now this is the actual Pangolin ID of that rule. And then we're going to have a Authentik user primary key. We need to know that, and that's it. So we already have our friend Tim. Tim's rule priority is going to be 100. It's also kind of a user-friendly way, I guess, of identifying that rule because there's no comments or anything like that, which I wish there were. But we do need to know what that rule ID is. So let's do one more endpoint for resource rules. And you know what? I'm just going to duplicate this so that it should keep the headers. No, it doesn't. That's too bad. Headers, copy all this. So authorization, paste that in there. Call this get resource rules. And so that should be this endpoint with a get. So except it's rules with an S. So put a S there. And now I can see each of those rules that I created. So rule ID 1, 2, 3 with the resource ID of 9. So Tim gets the very first rule ID ever created, which is 1. And let's just say that we're going to create someone for Jimmy, for example, here. He's going to have that second rule ID, which is 2. And then we're also going to need the Authentik user primary key. Let's go get that from Authentik. Go to our Authentik page, admin interface, directory, users, Tim. Click on him, and then his primary key is up here in the URL. So we're going to need to know that when we create our little webhook flow. So kind of like a little if statement that's going to be based on what the logged in user's primary key value is, what kind of webhook we're going to do to update Pangolin. Okay, and then just let's just go and create another person for that second rule. Anyways, let's go in here and go to users and go new user. Give him a username of Jimmy. Jimmy, create that user. And then let's go in and click on him. And we're going to add him to the Pangolin group and the media group. Or actually, let's just say that he's also a family member. Family members have access to Jellyfin. So of course, when he signs in, he doesn't exist in Pangolin yet, but we have it auto provisioning him like we set up in the last tutorial. So let's add him to those groups. Let's go ahead and give Jimmy a password of Jimmy. Okay. And we can see that he is user 9. So just go ahead and make a note of that for when we set this up. Okay, let's head over to my blog. Go to the Authentik webhooks, and we're going to skip the email. We're going to talk about the Pangolin integration API. We've already talked about this. We've already talked about auto provisioning. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is create a webhook mapping property. We are going to create a header mapping for our API key. We only need one of these, but then we're going to create a webhook mapping for each user. Okay, so before we do this, let's also just simulate the post request. So that is updating the rule here. So let's go ahead and create an endpoint. This is a post for update resource rule. Okay, so it's going to be this endpoint with the rule ID. So for Tim, the rule ID is going to be 1. Save that. Let's get that authorization header again and put that right here. Okay, so the body. Body is going to be the same body that we used for creating the rule. So let's look at that. Okay, so this is kind of simulating what that webhook is going to be. So for Tim, that's rule 1. And then let's just go ahead and update this to just some random IP address. And then let's go ahead and set the enabled to true. And then let's try to send that off. Resource rule updated successfully. Let's just check out this. And then we're going to refresh. And we can see that I updated that rule. So this is what we're trying to do with a webhook and Authentik. Someone signs in. We're going to do a webhook that enables the IP address that they signed in with to the Pangolin Jellyfin resource so that they whitelist their whole house. Okay, so what we need is we need a webhook mapping for the authorization header itself. And we need a webhook mapping for what the body of the request is going to be for each person. Okay, so let's go ahead and set that up. Go to customization and property mappings, and we're going to hit create. Scroll down to webhook mapping, click next, and you can call this Pangolin API authorization headers. Okay, and then we're going to copy my Python expression here and paste that. And now we're going to use the token that only has access to update rules. Now, I didn't actually create one of those yet. So let's do that real quick. Go to API keys, generate an API key. And this one can only update a specific resource rule. That's all it's going to do. Authentic resource rule update, generate, copy that. I'm going to paste that down here so I don't lose it. And we're going to paste that right there. So finish. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is create the actual body of the request for each person. So go to create webhook mapping, and I'll call this whitelist Tim IP Jellyfin body. Or I'll just say Tim IP body. Copy my Python expression and paste. And so this is using Python code to actually get the IP address from the person who is signing into Authentik. And then for Tim, his priority is 100. So we're going to keep it that. And we're basically just updating the value to the new IP. Now, if there's some kind of error in getting the IP, I put this OR in here just in case that's null. And so you would obviously see that if you've got the 000. And then the enabled needs to be true with a capital T because this is a Python expression. So save that. And then let's do the same thing for Jimmy. So webhook mapping, call this whitelist Jimmy IP body. This is the same thing, except it is priority 200, and save that. Next thing is actually creating a notification transport. So let's go to events, notification transports, and we're going to create one. So we have to create a transport for each person because each person is going to have its own API endpoint, its own URL. So because it has its own rule. So we're going to go to webhook generic. Let's call this Tim IP whitelist transport. We're going to use Tim's rule here, which was rule 1. So this is the URL for Tim. We're going to use the body mapping for Tim, and then we're also going to use the authentication header for the header mapping. Go ahead and create that. Okay, let's do the same thing with Jimmy. This is going to be Jimmy. And Jimmy had rule number 2. Change this to Jimmy IP body and create. Okay, now we're going to go to the notification rules and let's create the rule for Tim. So I'll call this whitelist Tim login rule. Now the group, we do need to actually select a group. that is being notified. Otherwise, the rule won't be active. So we can just set that to admins. It's not actually going to send like any kind of notification. It's just evoking our transport. And then we're going to select a transport. So we're going to select the Tim transport. The severity doesn't really matter, and hit create. Okay, so now we need to actually bind this to a policy that says that when Tim logs in, run this notification rule. So expand this and let's do create and bind policy. Now we're going to actually do an expression policy so that we can incorporate the event type, which is going to be login, and we can incorporate the person's ID who's logging in. So expression policy, and we're going to say Tim login event, and then copy this, and we're going to paste that right here. So if the event is login and the user primary key is 7 for Tim, that's why it's kind of handy to have this spreadsheet here, then that policy is returning true. So we're binding it to that expression. Okay, so let's go ahead and just do the same thing with Jimmy. Call this whitelist Jimmy login rule. We're going to select Jimmy's transport and hit create. Expand that, create and bind to a policy, expression, next. This is going to be Jimmy login event. So copy this again and paste that, except Jimmy's primary key is 9. So next and finish. Okay, so let's see if Tim and Jimmy are able to whitelist their own IP addresses. Let's just check our resource here. Go to Jellyfin. I'm going to go ahead and maximize this. And let's look at our rules. So we've got Tim and Jimmy right here. Now, Jellyfin, the Jellyfin app, this is no longer going to work because it just doesn't have access. If I tried to play content here, it's not going to work. If I sign out, let's see if it's even able to sign out. So let's go and force close that and open it again. It's going to try to connect to the same server and it should fail. Yep. So what we need to do is if Jellyfin doesn't work for our user, they need to know, hey, just hop on your phone, log into the Auth website again. So let's go to Auth. Okay, and the only problem is that I'm already signed in. What I have to do is come in here, sign out. And so Tim is going to come in and he's going to sign in. Password is Tim. So he has signed in. Let's go ahead and refresh the Pangolin page here. And we can see that Tim has whitelisted his IP address. By doing so, let's see if he can open up Jellyfin. And let's just see that, if his TV is working now. So let's see if Tim can connect. And so Tim can now connect and he can sign back in. This time I'm going to hit remember me so that I don't have to sign in again. Sign in. Okay, so I'm signed in. Okay, so Jimmy, let's say Jimmy is from a different location. Jimmy hasn't even signed in ever. So there's not even a Jimmy user here in Pangolin. He's going to be auto provisioned from Authentik. So let's head back to Proton VPN. Let's go to United States. And okay, let's say that Jimmy is located in Massachusetts. Okay, and Jellyfin is no longer going to work if it tries to reconnect. So people's residential IP addresses will change. They don't really change very often. It just kind of depends on your internet service provider, how often you have power outages, your router gets reset, but mine typically doesn't reset for several months. So shouldn't really be that big of an issue for people, but let's go ahead and have Jimmy sign in. So Jimmy says, hey, it's not working. He hops on his phone and he signs in with Jimmy username. Jimmy is his password. Okay, Jimmy has signed in. Let's refresh the page here. And Jimmy has now whitelisted his IP address in Massachusetts. So let's see if I can connect to the server now. This time it should remember my credentials. And sure enough, I got right in. So that is how you set up webhooks with Authentik to whitelist IP addresses for your Jellyfin resource. Hey guys, in this video I showed you how to protect your Jellyfin application behind Pangolin's single sign-on. There's a whole lot of benefits to doing this. If there's ever a vulnerability in the Jellyfin application itself, protecting it behind single sign-on, behind a proxy authentication layer is going to just protect you from those types of vulnerabilities. However, in doing so, it makes it a little harder for people to actually sign in through that proxy layer because Jellyfin's client applications don't provide any means of signing in through a proxy. So that's why we set up this video. We're able to allow users to whitelist their IPs. And in the future, if their residential IP ever changes, they can change that IP by just logging out and logging back into Authentik, and then they can start using their Jellyfin app on their TV once again. So don't forget to like and just subscribe. Gonna be doing a whole lot more useful videos for self-hosting this year. So hope to see you guys again. Thanks.